Why are we expecting any gacha game to be generous? After the Wuthering Waves anniversary stream announced very underwhelming rewards, alongside a whopping 12 limited character banners presented as player-friendly, there's been a lot of people loudly expressing their displeasure, and Kuro's response so far has been underwhelming. They cultivated a reputation for generosity thanks to how they responded to the issues and controversy over the course of the game's first few patches, and after steadying the ship, they took a huge step up in the quality of the game from version 2 onwards. While other prominent gachas have consistently put out very disappointing rewards for their anniversaries, many fans hope that Kuro would buck the trend and give them something which really celebrated just how far the game has come since the dark days of its launch. And yet, here we are. I think pretty much everyone can agree that the rewards they announced during the stream were at best a little underwhelming, and the presentation was an obvious own goal. But there's been a little more info since then, and also, after thinking through the implications, dare I say that the outrage over the rerun banners is a little overblown? It's at least a little more complicated than it seems at first glance. Let's talk about where people are coming from, why they are still absolutely right to demand more, and why the whole conversation is a weird one in the first place. Fans expect gacha games to treat their anniversaries as a time to thank their dedicated players and give out rewards and thanks and generally make the milestone feel memorable. The gacha revenue model is predatory, and events like this are one of the ways companies draw attention away from the fundamental issues and show appreciation towards their fans. However, they don't always get it right. Many gacha games, especially the most popular ones right now, have been major disappointments on this point in the past, giving out rewards which felt underwhelming at best or even outright insulting at worst. It's a balancing act the companies have to make between giving enough to grab attention and please their fans and minimizing its effect on their revenue. Expectations for these events are mostly set by two things: the past behavior of the company and the current behavior of their competitors. Each of these gacha games does something for their anniversary, and the rewards provided by one game have a strong influence on what fans expect from their competition. When a company known for disappointing anniversaries gives out something good, it's natural to assume that another company known for being generous would look to either match or even one-up that particular reward. Kuro have curated a reputation as one of the more generous gacha developers, especially compared to Hoyoverse, the leaders of the gacha space. Meanwhile, for the most recent Genshin anniversary, Hoyo announced that they are giving out a free standard 5-star selector for every anniversary going forward. Thanks to Kuro's perceived generosity, people had a lot of hope that they would buck the trend of underwhelming anniversaries. And with those higher expectations set by Hoyo, many speculated that Kuro would double down on their success and give out something really eye-catching to entice people to sit up and take notice. A decent number of pulls would of course be the bare minimum. Some even hoped that they'd give out one of the new limited 5-stars for free, or maybe one of the limited characters who are seen as less valuable now that the roster has grown. Most thought it more realistic that they would just match Hoyo's level and provide a standard 5-star selector, even though very few long-term players would really value one at all. What they actually announced had three major issues in my opinion: the rewards, the context, and the presentation. But even before we get to those, it's worth noting that the timing of the anniversary already wasn't ideal. Kuro seems to have a release cycle where they alternate between patches which are action-packed and ones which are filler. Version 2 was top tier, 2.1 was fun but undeniably filler, and then 2.2 was top tier again. But unfortunately, the anniversary falls into 2.3. Some fans came in with the hope that the contents of the patch would match up to those high points, which set them up for disappointment. For filler patch, it all looks pretty decent, with some fun events and some intriguing stories, but sadly it left these people feeling let down. It's unfortunate that Kuro didn't structure their schedule so that the anniversary would line up with a high point, but I feel like this is separate from the more direct complaints. So, the rewards. They announced 10 pulls as the main anniversary gift, plus the events and login rewards brought the total for the patch's version events up to 37 pulls. There were no free characters, no limited 5-star, no selector, nothing at all, and the total was seen by many as at least a little disappointing. They left it a little open by not including exact numbers for the rewards given out by many events, but many fans either missed those details or were just upset with how little had been shown so far, and voiced it in no uncertain terms across all of social media. After the initial backlash, Kuro announced an extra login event which will provide 10 pulls for each of the 3 types of banner, bringing the total up to 57 relevant pulls since we can generally ignore the standard banner, with announcements about further rewards and events to follow. We'll get back to that in a minute. When figuring out whether any given set of rewards in a gacha game are generous or not, it's important to look at what those rewards can be spent on. Kuro announced that in addition to the expected banners for Zani and Chakona, 10 other limited 5 stars would be running alongside them. These banners are split into 2 groups of 5 and have the same level of pity and the same 50-50 system as the main banners. Plus, of course, if you count the signature weapon banners, that's 24 banners to pick from during a single patch. Wuwa banners have a hard pity at 80 pulls. With this avalanche of banners in mind, even those 57 pulls feel insignificant, and those 2 announcements combined come across to many as a greedy move from the devs. Even all of that may have been fine if it wasn't for the way everything was presented. The livestream itself was quite engaging, and I actually disagree with those who felt that it was badly structured or anything like that. It started off well with an upbeat tone as they presented all the upcoming content, but of course the rewards they presented were well below the level everyone had expected. They kept teasing with a "but there's something more," only to have the something more be unexciting, and as the stream continued, their tone ended up coming across as self-congratulatory and the teasers as increasingly tone-deaf. It also doesn't help that much of what they focused on seemed to be all about either bringing in new players or encouraging those who had quit the game to give it another chance. It's always a little odd to see these kinds of announcements in a live stream. After all, the vast majority of people who actually watch will be the players who are still actively playing the game. That's doubly so for an anniversary, which is supposed to be framed as a celebration of the fans who stuck around. If there had been some stellar announcement at the end, it would all have been forgiven, but the best they had was a collab with Cyberpunk, which we'll be getting at some point in the future. So, what would be a reasonable amount of rewards for a gacha anniversary, and what would be generous? Many would base their answer on the pity system. For example, enough free pulls to get a 5-star would be seen as generous, while the 60 pulls we're getting now is most of the way there, so it could be considered reasonable, but I feel like that's short-sighted. For one thing, gachas give free currency with every patch, so it's important to compare the level of rewards from the anniversary to the amount you'd usually get in a typical patch with a similar amount of content. And while leakers will claim to have the exact numbers, we won't know for sure until we get official confirmation of all the details. For wuwa in particular, previous filler patches often gave out decent rewards to keep the players engaged, so I would be unsurprised if the actual count of extra pulls is much lower than it might seem. But even that would be missing the bigger picture. These companies do not give free rewards out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it because those rewards are an effective way to hook players in, keep them engaged, and potentially turn them into paying customers. The company will study how different levels of rewards affect player behavior, in the hopes that they can fine-tune how much they give to maximize player spending in the long run. And the fact is that gacha games give out free rewards with every update. While the exact amount varies patch by patch, you can only say with any certainty whether any given game is generous after looking at it from the long-term perspective. For example, it's pretty well documented that while Genshin gives out more rewards during Lantern Rite, the patches before and after are often more stingy to balance out that extra generosity. While they give you more in one place, they give less in another. Even if Kuro announced that they hear the community's complaints and that as a result the rewards will be doubled to a total of 120 pulls, it would still be too early to say whether or not they're being generous, because we could only tell how the total rewards over the course of this year compare by waiting for this time next year. It's tempting to focus on what we know right now, but we simply don't have the whole picture. Successful gachas are incredibly profitable. If they actually wanted to be generous, Kuro could absolutely afford to give out a free Chakona to every person who plays the game. People would still spend money. After all, Zani is coming out too, and she seems to be one of the most anticipated characters in the history of the game, plus Kartithia and many others are presumably upcoming as well. It's even possible that people might spend more. For example, I'm always far more inclined to spend on a game which I feel is being generous in return. That's one of the reasons I stopped spending on Genshin, and it's one of the reasons I do spend on Infinity Nikki. However, being so conspicuously generous would set an expectation going forward. Each anniversary, people would expect the same. If they gave someone out for free for this first time around, but didn't keep that up in future years, we would see the same kind of backlash we're seeing right now, but exponentially worse. Kuro are in this to make money. There's always a risk that being too generous would decrease the amount of revenue the game would generate. While we can argue all we want that many of us would spend more, that may seem just too big a leap of faith for it to feel worth the risk from their perspective. It's my personal opinion that the amount of rewards we're getting are a little on the stingy side, even after the extra pulls from the apology, and that they may just be an attempt to lower expectations. That said, I also had no particular expectations, so I'm not particularly disappointed, and I'm pretty sure we haven't heard the last of the updates on this yet. What about those rerun banners, which I said might be more complicated than they seem at first glance? While most people I've seen are hating on these banners, I actually feel both ways. Most players really won't benefit from them all that much right now. The only people who will really appreciate them are whales who only just started the game, since they can now happily fill their roster of characters without having to wait. Everyone else simply won't have the pulls available to take advantage, though some small minority may be glad to pull for a character they missed. Which leads me to the reason I'm undecided. One of the most insidious manipulation tactics gacha games use is the fear of missing out. We never know when any new character will be available again in the future, so if you don't get them, it might be a risk that you won't be able to for a long time. Many of us have been in a situation where we've spent all our pulls on a character and didn't quite get them. Maybe we lost a 50-50. Maybe we just had bad luck and can't quite make it to pity. With the added knowledge that it might take a long time before the character becomes available again, the psychological pressure to spend so you can get what you want really adds up. So far, the wait for each rerun in wuwa has been fairly short, but as the roster grows, they will get more congested over time. If you had asked me what I thought of the idea of making all characters available on a special banner during an anniversary patch, I'd have instantly seen the upside. If this is an annual thing, then FOMO has much less of a sting, and the rerun congestion becomes a smaller issue. One of the most manipulative parts of the gacha system would be curbed at least a little. Of course, when looked at from that perspective, it's still very predatory, but only because the entire concept of gacha systems is predatory. However, when framed as one of the major rewards for the anniversary, in that context, it's an absolute joke. Here guys, as a celebration for how great an audience you've been, you can spend more money! Yay! I feel like this is yet another detail which would have come across well if the rest of the rewards had been up to the level people expected, but which looks very awkward in retrospect. There are some very simple ways they could have fixed this. For example, by removing the 50-50 system or giving it a lower pity, at least for the first 5-star someone wishes for on the banner. This would risk annoying people who already have all the characters they want, but that seems like it would be just a minor downside. After all, someone who could afford to do all that likely doesn't really care all that much about saving a couple of $100. I feel like there's actually some potential here to make this into a legitimately player-friendly anniversary reward, which could have set an interesting precedent for the rest of the gacha space as well. But with the way it's described for now, it kinda sucks. Hopefully, this is one of the things they'll announce in the coming week. So, how did Kuro mess up so badly? Wouldn't it be obvious to anyone that this would not be enough? One theory, which came to mind straight away, is that they deliberately scoffed the anniversary rewards with the intention all along to come in and save the day in yet another devs listened moment. The obvious argument against this is that the players would have been much happier without all the outrage and controversy, and would have been happier to get some good rewards the first time around. However, there are some possible motivations which would make sense from their perspective. One of the main benefits of anniversaries is that they bring attention to the game, and controversy brings in much wider audience and gets people engaged and talking. If the devs expected their consolation prize to assuage any upset fans, in theory, the temporary anger, followed by another round of devs listened, would be a net positive to them, bringing in a wider audience at the expense of the short-term happiness of the existing fans. But more importantly, it would let them lower expectations. Kuro might have come to the conclusion that all the rewards they gave out during the first year of the game set the bar too high, and now that the game is more stable with a healthy audience, they could afford to be less generous. By giving out awful rewards at first, followed by a consolation prize, they bit the bullet now while getting rid of most of the anger, allowing them to reset expectations for future anniversaries without too many downsides. There's no way for us to know whether this is what actually happened, but with these points in mind, I think it's something that some marketing hotshot might actually advocate for. If that was what happened, then it sure looks like they miscalculated. While the current total of around 60 pulls may have been sufficient to keep people happy if it had been announced all at once, those who feel disrespected are still unhappy even after seeing the extra rewards. If that section of the fanbase are large enough, and the things Kuro said they're still working on don't fill that gap in expectations, Kuro might end up having to come up with something more. This whole situation is, as always, an exercise in psychological anchoring. Gacha games don't just take your money, they shape how you feel about its value. By giving you free pulls and telling you that they're worth a certain amount of money, they make you feel like you've received something worthwhile, and so you're more inclined to accept the value they place on what they gave you. And when you begin to accept that valuation, you become much more likely to seriously consider spending money to buy some extra. It's incredibly difficult to evaluate things like this without some kind of benchmark, and when we let the companies provide that context for us, we let them set the guardrails which guide everything we think about the game. This applies to everything: the currency we expect for taking part in events, the gacha rates themselves, the pity system, the amount we pay for top-ups, and much more. This is also why the in-game shops always have some packs that are of absurdly bad value. It makes the other packs, the ones they really want you to buy, look like good value in comparison. The rewards we get for free during an anniversary event are just yet another tool these companies use to extract as much value from us as possible. So even if you think that people are being a little overdramatic about this particular situation, you still shouldn't be on the developer's side. And I say all this as a person who will happily spend a fair bit on games that I feel are meeting my expectations. Gacha companies are not your friends. They don't give things out for the goodness of their hearts, and any rewards are carefully calculated, not to maximize the player's enjoyment, but to maximize how much we spend instead. But the company would not exist without its audience. It's a symbiotic relationship, and it's fair to have reasonable expectations and to be disappointed with what Kuro have promised so far. It's fair to be angry that their response has focused on rewards alone and that they have not addressed the issues people have with the anniversary banners. When devs fail to meet expectations, it's important to be vocal, since that's one of the only ways to cause a billion-dollar company to make any changes for the better. It'll be interesting to see how much changes between now and the anniversary itself. Until next time!